is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm good. Live from South Dakota, Jim McDonald.
Yeah, you've been making a cross-country move the last couple of weeks here, so hopefully things are going well.
They're going well enough. We'll save it for one of our banter episodes, and I'll get into it.
Yeah, people love the banter, but that is not today. Today is all about P0. So we've got a sponsored episode, and so we are going to invite our guests on here in a second. But just to make it clear, right, this is a sponsored episode. We do these from time to time. Let's just get a little more, product specific. I would say most of our episodes are more vendor neutral, and we generally don't have vendors on those episodes. But this gives an opportunity to learn more, and this is one I think a lot of people will want to hear about. So let me go ahead and introduce P0 Security. You can find them on the web at p0.dev/IDAC. And we've got their CEO and founder, Shashwat Sagal. So welcome to the show, Shashwat.
Thanks, Jeff. How are you?
I'm good. It's a little bit warm here, but I'm inside. And as we were chatting before we hit record, I am very much an indoor cat. So I am totally fine in my, air-conditioned, home studio, office, things like that. So hopefully things are going well for you as well.
Yeah, no complaints. It's right at the start of the California summer, the best time to be living out here. Not that other times are any different, but definitely my personal favorite time of the year.
Yeah, it's tough to beat California weather. It's generally pretty darn good. So, congratulations and thank you for making me envious. And I'm sure a lot of people listening who are either sweltering in the heat that has been gripping, a lot of the US or around the world or whatever it may be. But let's find out about your identity background. So the first time we have people on, we just like to find out where they came from, from an identity perspective. So we're going to put you on the hot seat here and say, how did you get into identity? Is it something that you chose or did it choose you?
Oh, great question. I'd say a bit of the latter. So I have been in engineering and R&D and product roles for the vast majority of my career. And the mid 2010s were a very interesting time to be building products out in the Bay Area. Why do I say that? It was a time where, as you all know, cloud native development was going mainstream. Everyone was either moving to the cloud, or if they started within the cloud, if they were cloud native, they were experimenting with cloud native technologies and infrastructure like Kubernetes and various databases and such, right? And I built a variety of products across different spaces. And the commonality in every one of those roles was that as application development, as engineering became more and more cloud native, the problem of securing who has access to to privileged resources kept getting more and more complex until it hit what I believe as a breaking point. And what I mean by that is that the old tools, the tools around managing privileged access, which all of us are familiar with, the legacy tools, which I like to believe used to manage vaults and secrets, right? They were not built for an environment where privileged access meant access in the cloud. And we saw this gap and we saw it becoming worse, the problem becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's when I decided to start P0 with some of my colleagues. And fast forward 3 years, here we are.
So you had kind of a personal investment here, right, of seeing this problem firsthand with some of the roles you had before. How do you solve that? So let's talk about P0 kind of up front. Tell us about P0, and then what are some of the capabilities that you bring to address those problems that you've just talked about?
Great question. So let me back up a little bit and talk about the broader space that we play in and how that has evolved over the years. And then maybe that'll be a good segue for me to talk about the capabilities that we bring to the table, right? If you think about the space itself, people call it in various different names, but at its core, it's really just managing privileged access or privileged access management, right? And 25 years ago, the space was, as I mentioned, synonymous with creating vaults and secrets. And the definition of the space at the time was depended on what privileged resources were. So for people who've been like you and I, who've been in the industry for decades, right? If we wind back the clock, 20 years ago, privileged resources meant servers in the data center or databases that were physically located on boxes within the data center, right? And access to them basically meant create a root account or a Linux administrator account or a database admin account, create a credential to those accounts, put them in a vault, and then rotate those, and then issue those credentials to people on demand, right? I call this version of PAM as the vault-led PAM or the secrets-led PAM. Then, let's call it early 2010s. This was the early cloud era. And instead of servers and databases being physically located within a data center, they began to be located in AWS, GCP, Azure, right? And the very first use cases that people had was just lift and shift your workloads as they are from the data center to the cloud, right? So then the use cases for PAM translated to, hey, give me access to databases and virtual machines in the cloud, right? Easy peasy, right? So in those very early days, the legacy or the vault-led PAMs attempted to solve the same problem by checking out credentials to these databases and virtual machines. The problem was there were too many of them, right? As is, anyone who's familiar with cloud development will know that infrastructure spins up and down on demand, and there's a lot of infrastructure, right? So the old strategy of securing credentials didn't quite work as well as people would have liked. It left SSH keys for virtual machines all over the place. It left database credentials all over the place, and rotating those manually became a bit of a pain in the neck, right? So the second phase evolution of PAM was what I call as a bastion-led PAM. And what I mean by bastion-led PAM, well, instead of giving and managing access to each and every one of these servers individually, people saw that it was much easier to just put a bastion in front of your network, or a proxy or a jump host. The bastions come in various different names, right? And just control the access to your network through this one server called a bastion, right? So what I'll call this, the PAMs of this era, as the bastion-led PAM. They worked, except they were also a giant pain in the neck in different ways than the older PAM solutions. The problem with spinning up infrastructure was that, hey, as you and I know, every time you start deploying an infrastructure for anything, you're on the hook to maintain it, right? So maintenance and usability and developer experience was a major challenge in using the PAM solutions of this era. And secondly, the other big problem was, once you were in the network, you still had access to everything. In other words, you had standing access as a developer to a lot of your privileged infrastructure, right? And hence, to solve these problems is, we believe we are in the third evolution of PAM, which I'd call as the API-led PAM, right? And that is ultimately the problem we are solving, which is that as P0, we want to provide a solution that can secure access to all of your sensitive assets in the cloud from identities of all sort. Whether it's users, whether it's service accounts, whether it's machine identities, or whether it's AI agents, right? And what's changed in the past few years is that now the cloud IAM APIs are robust enough that we can use an architecture that's based on using those IAM APIs to secure privileged access on demand for any identity of any sort. And that is what we call as the API-led PAM, right? It's a natural evolution of PAM from Bastion-led PAM Vault-led PAM or Secret-led PAM to Bastion-led PAM to ultimately to API-led PAM, right? And it's meant for organizations who've been using cloud native technologies or hybrid environments. And what they have witnessed is that there are so many identities in the cloud, so many resources in the cloud, users, people call them non-human identities or service accounts or IAM roles, and all of these can access the cloud in so many different ways that you really need a different solution that can work at the scale of the cloud. That is the ultimate problem we are looking to solve.
So you talked about sort of the history there of PAM and the Vault era, the Bastion era, the API era, and I'm sure there'll be future eras that we are thinking about. How do analysts think about this? Is when you have this conversation with folks like that who are looking at the markets, like how do they see P0, and do they slot you in as a privileged access management vendor or some other spot? Like how does that typically that conversation go?
No, it's a great question. That is, like most spaces in cybersecurity, right? There are various overlaps with various different spaces. In particular, there is a reasonable overlap between PAM and IGA, right? We do solve some IGA related use cases as well. And for the most part, when analysts look at us, though, it's they recognize that most of the capabilities that we bring to the table are within the domain of a next gen PAM vendor, and that's what people tend to recognize us as.
Okay, makes sense. Nobody likes to be put into a box, I think, but I think it probably helps people kind of understand like where things fit sort of together in a market. I gotta ask, P0 is such a unique name. Where does the name P0 come from?
So the story here is that in one of the companies that I worked at before I started P0, there was an acquisition of a company, and as we were trying to merge the company's assets into the wider code base, what we realized was that the company which was acquiring the acquisition obviously had a very high bar for security, and they expected the acquisition to be at a similar high bar. So they had to make sure that they pause any development of any new features for one entire year in order to get the security story together, right? And as we were implementing the features and functionalities to make sure the combined solution had a watertight security posture, by far the biggest challenge that we faced as an R&D team was answering the simple question: who has access to production? Or rather, who or what has access to production, right? And how do we make sure that access is secure, that access is least privileged, it conforms to all the best practices, no static credentials, no long-standing keys, every role is just the right sized. And it turned out to be a ginormous problem, right? Just operationally, how do you make sure that these best practices get implemented? And that was the motivation for calling the name of the company as P0. As I'm sure you know, and as I'm sure many of your listeners are also aware, P0 is the highest level of severity of any incident. So our tagline is access is always a P0 problem.
Yeah, I wanted to go back because I think the explanation you gave on the history of privilege management, it made so much sense. I just never heard anybody put it in those different eras. And it kind of leads me to the question that I wanted to ask, which was, when I talk to practitioners about how they're solving the very problem of, okay, now your company is moving more and more of its IT operations out to the cloud. How are you managing privilege? How are you managing all these new accounts? And I know that kind of the starting point of the preference is, well, I've got IGA, I've got privilege access management, maybe I have KIM. Can I just use these tools? I get the sense that obviously that falls short, right? You started this company p0.dev, and by the way, that's p with the number 0.dev and p0.dev/IDAC if you want to learn more. But you started this company, you had a vision that if you're just to take kind of the existing tools and try to approach this problem, it falls short. My question to you is, what is that shortcoming?
The solutions that you mentioned in particular, like things like IGA, things like KIM, right? They predominate, at least as far as KIM and related spaces like CSPM and CNAP, etc., are concerned, they are concerned primarily with offering visibility to an environment, right? In other words, it's an after the fact attestation of sorts. Hey, these are all the things that exist in your environment. Let us just make sure somebody's reviewing that. And more often than not, it's either the SOC team or the cloud security team. They'll do a review based on the limited context they have, and they'll say, okay, it passes all the checks, or hey, it does not pass the checks, right? This is very much a compliance-driven problem or a compliance-driven use case, right? When it comes to actually managing the privileged access, who are the people who are using access, creating access, destroying access on a day in, day out basis? It's not the people who are reviewing access after the fact, 3 months later, 6 months later on a quarterly schedule or what have you, right? The people who are using access tend to be the developers, the DevOps teams, the platform engineering teams. These are the people who need to maintain production, need to make sure access to production is secure. They are the ones who need to go and make sure databases are being spun up, data jobs are being executed, clusters are healthy, cluster health is healthy, etc., right? They and what we, because there's a distinction in the persona, it's not a SOC use case, it's more of a practitioner driven use case. The use case becomes, hey, I don't want to merely review who has access. I want to give people access safely. I want to make sure that whatever they do behind the scenes is audited. And once their work is done, I want to destroy that access, right? In other words, the goal of PAM is not to ensure after the fact that, hey, somebody's reviewing access. That's the goal. That's a compliance related use case relevant for IGA and KIM. But for PAM, the use case is every access to any privileged system should be A, short-lived, B, it should not be, it should be least privileged, and C, it should not use static credentials or long-lived keys or long-lived tokens. It should, as much as possible, be based on short-lived credentials. And I'd add a fourth one in there. Any activity that is going on under the hood should be auditable, logged for any kind of compliance-related audit requirements, right? So I'd say that that is really the job of a PAM solution, to make sure, I reiterate, any access is short-lived, least privileged, does not use static credentials, and is auditable by design. And that's how we differ from an IGA solution or a KIM solution.
Yeah, I was kind of, so you jumped me to one of the other questions that I wanted to ask, or maybe a topic that I wanted to pose, because I think there's, at least this is the goal state that I've come down to, where you want your privilege access management program to be, is that at least your privilege access maybe it's not the credentials, maybe it's more the entitlements, that it's where the rubber hits the road. You want that to be just in time, zero standing privileges, because if some account gets compromised, it won't just lead to inappropriate access or downright dangerous access. Is that kind of where you're going with what you're talking about earlier? And then, I mean, the reason that organizations aren't doing that, I don't think it's because they don't agree with that or that they're lazy. It's just, it's hard to do. Maybe it's hard to do because the tools that existed up until today don't really make it easy to do. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So you hit the nail on the head, right? Entitlements are something you worry about when a system is very complex, like the cloud, right? During the vault-led PAM era, there's no such thing as entitlements, right? Once you had root privileges to a box, you could go in there and do whatever it is that you wanted to, right? The entitlements were fairly easy to control because there were only a handful of systems. This started breaking down completely in the cloud native era, especially as IAM APIs became more sophisticated. Because instead of the front door access via username password, the attack surface became entitlements, right? So a big portion of what we call as the API-led PAM is, as I said, the problems it looks to solve are how do you make every access short-lived and least privileged and auditable by design? You know what? That means just-in-time access for users. That means zero standing access for users as well as non-human identities, right? It's how do you implement and operationalize these concepts? That is really the heart of what this next-gen PAM is all about.
So I'm wondering when you get called into, okay, let's see a demo of P0. Is that usually when an organization is saying that we've kind of hit our limits with privilege access management, or we don't have privilege access management, or, I've seen a lot of privilege access management organizations bind to privilege access management and it flops, right? Or maybe they own a whole lot of licenses and are just doing vaulting and things like that. It's because there's so much resistance from the developer. And one thing I'm getting the sense of is that the developers want to use this product. It makes their job easier. So, one, I wanted to validate that. But two, I'm more interested to know, when is it that practitioners are calling you in? Is it because their wholesale need to, they've recognized that they need a new platform? Or is it that there are certain use cases that are coming up and they're looking to, add on to what they have to kind of just address those use cases?
Yeah, no, great question. So I'd say people fall along the spectrum of how much bought into the concept of PAN they are, right? On one extreme of the spectrum are people who are already bought in. They know they need PAN, and most likely they're already using some version or older version of a PAN product. Let's say that they are using a bastion-led PAN, right? They'll security team. In fact, one of our largest customers falls in this category. They were using a bastion-led PAM with let's say a 15-year-old technology, right? And they realized that the user experience of maintaining infrastructure and deploying infrastructure is not the best in the world, and B, this product gives developers standing access to critical infrastructure, which does not fly with most sophisticated customers anymore, right? Every customer wants their sensitive data in the hands of their vendors to be secure, right? So this company, who's a vendor to their own customers, they wanted to make sure that their developers do not have standing access or standing privileges to any of their customer data. So they came in and they decided, hey, yes, we would like a solution in which our developers are, their experience is not affected. If anything, it's enhanced, and yet they do not have standing access to any infrastructure anymore. They can elevate their privileges on demand in a just-in-time fashion, and when their work is done, they can revoke those. We can revoke that access, right? So that is one extreme of customers who are completely bought into the idea they need PAM, and if anything, they might need a refresh of the legacy PAM vendors that they already have. On the other extreme, there might be customers, as you said, right, who where the security team knows that they need PAM, right, but they may not have the buy-in from the developer teams just yet. Developers are a little hesitant to give up their standing access. They are a little hesitant to make sure that these service accounts, IAM roles, etc., they conform to the best practices, right? And for such customers, the idea of PAM is more of a journey, right? Which starts by giving them visibility into every access path to their production stack, right? So that's the step one. Step two is identifying which of those access paths or access patterns are potentially risky, and giving them workflows to implement some governance or remove those standing privileges. And step three, once that is done, how do you transition them over to a just-in-time access model, right? So these three steps don't happen overnight. It becomes more of a journey to educate the broader teams that, hey, there's a better way to do this, and that's how those conversations go. And most customers are somewhere on the spectrum between these two extremes, as you can imagine, right? And that's it. It really comes down to understanding what specific problem they're looking to solve and working with them to make sure we operationalize that.
Yeah, great answer. I'm kind of sitting here thinking, like, the identity industry follows what's happening in IT. The tools in identity need to solve the problems or challenges that the IT infrastructure, applications, et cetera, throw at it. I'm also kind of thinking with that question that it does seem to me, it goes all the way back to that timeline that you painted, going from 20-year-old where it was the vault, then it was Bastion or Jumpbox. Now it's API driven, that really there is legacy PAM and modern PAM. I feel like when I talk to organizations, and this has always been true, okay? So this has been true since my very first days in IT, is that organizations have one foot in the past and one foot in the future, right? One foot in the past is always going to be there, but if you look 5 years down the road, more is going to be what you call the future today, right? And so if you're starting out today and you say, we got one foot in the future, if you say we need to solve for both, bottom line is we need to solve for both, then you're going to probably need legacy PAM and modern PAM at the same time. But if you're at the point where you have nothing and you have to pick between the two, I'd say, well, where are you going to? First off, you're not just going to snap your fingers and PAM's going to be rolled out. So you're looking at a couple of years, and you have to look at, like, where are you going to be in the future? Are you going to be mostly in the future or mostly in the past? If you're going to be mostly in the past, maybe you do need legacy PAM as your answer. But if where you're going is going to be in the cloud, it's going to be using much more automation, maybe AI agents in the future, like, that's where you put your investment. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you hit the nail on the head, right? Given the implementation times involved with digital transformations of most of the size that most respectable organizations undertake, right? It's the calculus in front of most security leaders is not just what they need now, but hey, given our organization's current investments, given our organization's planned investments, where are we likely to be in the next 5 years, right? What is my stack going to look like? Is it going to be more cloud native? Is it going to be less cloud native? Is it completely irrelevant based on some of the AI investments we are making? And given that reality, or given that projection 5 years out, what is the best solution that fits the needs and will future proof us so that we don't have to worry about this damn problem for the next 10 years, right? That's the calculus in front of most security leaders out there. What is the maximum we can solve that would make this investment moot for the next 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to ask you another question based on something you said earlier. We were talking about we need to, I think you're taking a story from your past and you're talking about protecting people, but also the non-people, right? So you're getting into this whole non-human identity question. And I guess in my mind, they're different. But I'm not, and having talked to you in the past, I kind of get the sense you don't treat them differently or you don't think about them differently when it comes to management of the access that they have. And I'm wondering if you can explain that a little bit.
Great question. So I think I want to distinguish between what's a use case and what's a company, right? Or rather, what's a use case and what's a platform. Absolutely, securing service accounts, non-human identities, etc., is a very legitimate use case, right? And absolutely, this thing is becoming more relevant now that we are in a cloud native era. We are moving towards an agentic era where the number of entities that can access your sensitive infrastructure and data is increasing and only going to explode even more rapidly from here on, right? But I would argue that is a use case and not a company defining feature in and of itself, because I define the space privileged access management as, hey, I need a platform that helps secure privileged access to my sensitive infrastructure, period. Nowhere do I say that it has to only come from users or it has to come from machines or it has to come from agents, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if I'm a security leader, I care about securing access because that is my most important perimeter, for the lack of a better word. I hate the word perimeter. It gets used and abused so much, but it's true, right? It's identity and access is the most important line of defense, right? But it almost sounds a little too narrow to think about access for only certain categories of identities, right? Particularly when it's the same product or the same framework of thinking can solve both those problems, right? At the end of the day, our belief is that any kind of access, whether it's from users or from non-human identities, any kind of access should be least privileged, it should be short-lived, and it should conform to the best practices of not using static credentials, no matter whether it's for users, AI agents, or non-human identities. Right?
So, yeah, it's absolutely. So the business drivers that you just mentioned, I'm 100% on board with. I mean, you are spot on. My question, I guess my follow-up question to that is, you talked about we're in this API era. I think I know what that means. Is that what enables you to more or less treat them the same, or is it just the business philosophy? Is the technology in the background, this API era that, if you can script it to go out to an API, then you can make it work.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? So it's not just the business drivers that I was talking about; it's also the technical drivers. In a nutshell, the way our product works is that we create a graph of every identity in the system, who's the consumer of that identity, what credentials they're using, what roles, permissions they have, and what sensitive resources they have access to, right? So think of it as a graph. And it does not make a huge amount of sense, in my opinion, to treat this graph differently for users versus non-human identities versus agents, whatnot, right? So technically, we have under the hood a a common engine that treats all of these different kinds of identities as one, right? And all of this graph is just built by hooking together the APIs of different systems, such as your cloud providers, your identity providers, your HRMS systems, right? And we don't really need to slice and dice it further based on the kind of identity. When one common framework is good enough for treating both of them as first class citizens.
And so I think that's going to be a lead into my next question or my last question, which was really I'm thinking from the practitioner perspective. So some tools you buy them because they've got great features and functionality. Other tools bring to the table like wide visibility, like you can connect to a lot of things and get the visibility. And I'm wondering from the P0 perspective, which of those two camps do you fall into?
So ultimately, we want to be the tool that helps in the operationalization of least privilege, right? And visibility is a necessary first step on that journey. So again, it goes back to what I was saying. Customers fall on a spectrum. There'll be ones that are more advanced who'll come in and say, you know what, we don't need visibility. Just help me implement least privilege because I already have the basic building blocks in place. Right? For them, we are first and foremost an operationalization of least privilege company. Right? Then there'll be others who are bought into the idea, but they may face developer resistance to begin with. For them, in the beginning, we'll land by providing them visibility. But ultimately, even for them, if we are so successful, we want to move them towards a model of operationalizing least privilege, right? So to answer your question, Jim, for all customers, we are ultimately a company that wants to operationalize least privilege. For some of those, the way to do so is by giving them visibility and hand-holding them on the journey.
So all this talk of identity, and you're preaching to the choir here, right? You're on the Identity at the Center podcast, right? So we kind of get it, but there's a lot of people who listen to this who maybe don't consider themselves in identity. They might be in engineering or in security or somewhere around there. What's something that you wish like engineering people would understand about access and identities and how to manage it? Because I hate to say it, but people keep saying identity is the new perimeter. It's been around forever. It's not a new perimeter. So I feel like this is an area where we could probably do some education for people who maybe aren't as familiar with it or haven't traditionally looked at identity as part of their role.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the biggest learning for anyone who's not in a core security function, who's not thinking about identity on a day in, day out basis, is that expediency in technical decisions ultimately always creates headaches further down the line. And in many areas, this is truer than others. And identity happens to be one. And what I mean by that is, if you're an engineer, it's very easy to be expedient and say that, hey, no, I need standing access all the time because I need it for my work. Or, hey, I need to hard code this credential into the service that I'm building because you know what, YOLO, right? But those things are never the security best practice. They always snowball over time. They almost always compound and in time become a much bigger problem than if they're addressed directly at the source. And if you have the right tools, then addressing those at the source is actually much easier than it sounds. Right? So that is something that I wish the people who are in touch with identity, but from a user perspective, but not thinking about it day in, day out, that is something that I would wish that they would stop for a minute and appreciate.
So let me challenge a little bit, because what happens if you've inherited a mess? Right. This happens a lot, right? Is, someone comes into a new role, or, decisions that were made in the past maybe aren't the best decisions, and we have to pick up the pieces of whatever that looks like. What's some advice if you're in that scenario where you know what you should do, but it might be difficult, either financially or politically.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, some amount of technical debt is to be expected, right? People got to do things which they have to do. Everyone is making trade-offs based on the time, the budget they have, the resources they have, the OKRs they need to hit. That's just the world we live in, right? Uh, but at the same time, many of these decisions need not be made the way they are, especially for greenfield projects, or even if for brownfield projects, right? If you have to fix something, right, just make sure you are tackling the most important big rocks in the mess that you inherit, right? And it just so happens identity is usually one of the biggest rock, if not the biggest rock.
Here. You're like I said, you're talking to the right people about this. I guess I kind of want to wrap up the conversation with, where do you see this going? Because you've talked about the different eras and being in the API era. What do you see as like the next era and like the next challenges that we need to be thinking about? And how do you see P0 kind of staying with it, right? Because you don't want to get left behind, as we've seen with some of the other eras.
Yeah, look, this is an easy one, right? We are in the age of AI agents, right? Or we are very soon, depending on who you ask, we are at the doorstep of the age of AI agents. And what this means is that very soon, once a lot of these agents are in production, 99% of the organizations that I've spoken to, they're still playing around with agents. They haven't been productionized just yet, but it's only a matter of time, right? So I think the next evolution of PAM would be the agent-led PAM, for the lack of a better word, where the same problems, by the way, again, the core focus of PAM hasn't really changed for the last 30 years. It's still make sure every access, I hate to sound like a broken record, but that is what it is. Every access needs to be least privileged. Every access needs to be short-lived. Every access needs to be auditable. And every access needs to be not using static keys and credentials, right? The same four problems need to be solved for agents, right? And it will just make for a product with slightly different form factor, slightly different assumptions based on how agents get operationalized in practice. But again, the Gen 4, I'm pretty sure, would be the agent-led PAM, solving the same three or four problems for an entirely new class of identities.
It sounds a little bit kind of like the Matrix, where we've got a bunch of agents talking to each other and figuring out what they should and shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And, I've kind of said this before in previous episodes. It's like, all right, you agents, you figure it out and let me know what you decide. Just kind of take care of it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a good way of putting it, right? I mean, it's and the use cases, the tangible use cases, are actually very easy to think about. So, like for example, right, if you're using a coding agent, you want to make sure that whatever agent you're using, Cursor or Prod or something else, you want to make sure that they have access. If they are talking to GitHub, for example, right, you want to make sure that these agentic identities are not using personal access tokens, or they're using if they are authenticated via OAuth using an MCP in the middle. You want to make sure that the tokens that they're using are governed. They are not static. They are not long-lived. They're not hard-coded into the MCP, right? You want to make sure that their scopes to the repos that they are accessing are least privileged. No agent has, write or delete access to just about every repo in your code base, right? So again, the precise problems might sound different, but it all rhymes with what has happened in the past.
I feel like it's a speed problem more than anything, and an automation thing, because the use cases are the same. It's still, even if it's not a human versus a human, it's still onboarding, offboarding, joiner, mover, leaver. It just so happens that they're not humans. But the speed with which it has to take place with, and the ephemeral nature of some of these, microservices or API calls or agents that might only live for milliseconds, you still need the traceability and the audit logs to show that, oh yeah, this agent did exist. It did these things in these 3 milliseconds, and then it went away, right? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So this has been a really fun conversation. I'm glad you were able to join us. I have to say, I'm going to assume you do more than just, solving identity challenges. What do you do like outside of, being in the nerdery, with us talking MCP and PAM and agents and all that other stuff? Like, what do you do for fun to unwind?
I spend time with my family first and foremost. I have an 8-year-old. I play tennis with him. Earlier, I used to play tennis by myself. These days, increasingly, I play tennis with him. I like to stay fit as much as I can by going to the gym, by swimming, by playing tennis whenever time allows. And I'm trying to get back into a reading habit, which I've not been so good at, especially since I started a company.
Is there a specific genre of reading that you like to do? Is it fiction, nonfiction? Like, what are you into?
Increasingly, it's historical narratives.
Okay. So now you're starting to talk a little bit of Jim's language, because he's always interested in like documentaries about history, working out, stuff like that. I guess I'll let you two talk, right? Recommendations for each other.
maybe the next time we talk, I'm on the road to South Dakota, for all you know.
I would love it. You'd be welcome here.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. Jim, like, what would you give like as a suggestion for Shashwat to read? I know you're big into like documentaries and stuff like that.
I don't read, so I have YouTube Premium because I can't stand the commercials, and it's just unbelievable the amount of historical documentaries. And now what I'm seeing as a new genre is that there are content creators who take a period in time and build a day in the life of story, and they'll pick a fictitious figure who lived in that place at that time, like New York City in 1882, and you just watch and I'm talking like an hour-long documentary.
Yeah. I love those.
I can't believe like there are people out there, and I know when I say it's like an independent creator, I don't know what his whole corporate structure is, but there's one guy, because I saw several videos where he's the fictitious character, he's the actor in all these different videos. And I'm like, this is the future. It's people kind of saying, hey, this is what I want to create. I can be an artist now and put together something because all of the materials that I need are commercially available. There's AI to help me create backgrounds and create videos, et cetera, and put that up, and then other people can enjoy it. That's what I love about technology. We talk about like the bad parts of technology. Yeah, they're there, but there's so much good that can come from it.
Shashwat, do you know what Jim's talking about with this day in the life thing? Because I've never heard of this. It sounds kind of interesting, but I don't know what to think about it.
No, it sounds interesting. I'm not too big into YouTube videos. I do not have YouTube Premium, just for the record. But it definitely sounds very interesting.
Well, you're in the minority here. I think Jim and I are both YouTube Premium. It's on quite a bit for me, and I think it's such an interesting thing. I think, if I'm going to lay a day in the life, Jim, I want to like have some fantasy around it, like Game of Thrones, right? Or I don't know, The Matrix, right? Things like that. I want to like have a good story, and because I mean, you're going to have to fill me in on this at some point, because I can't imagine that there are that many interesting lives of like normal like people. If that makes sense.
These are fictitious lives. The person's making them up, and then they make a video around it. I'll send you a few of them.
Okay. I mean, because I'm thinking of like the most dry video ever, where it's like, oh, I woke up today and then I went and did laundry. And then I, sat at my computer all day and did nothing. Or, I went and farmed or something like that. I'm like, I'm sure there's a market for it, but I'm just
so this
struggling.
Day in the life of this guy in 1882. He was in New York City. He was a German immigrant, and his girlfriend came over, and some pickpocket like dropped something in her bag, and then she pulls it out of the bag. The police see her. They arrest her. Now he's like trying to figure out how to get her out of jail. Like there's a whole little drama behind it. So it's kind of a good story, well acted. And I mean, it seems like there's a little more to it than a one person, thing, but it's pretty incredible that it's out there as just free content.
I'll have to check it out. I think, my position is everybody at this point is a content creator. It's just, do people want to consume that content?
That's right.
I mean, we're all on camera somewhere. So, all right. Well, this has been just a really fun conversation, Shashwat. Thank you so much for being with us. Any final thoughts that you want to get out there for the folks who are listening and or watching?
Access is our priority zero. So if you have any challenges managing privileged access to cloud native or hybrid environments, please come talk to us. We'll be happy to help.
I love that tagline. Access is our priority zero. That's something that resonates with a lot of IT people around the world. So good one there. So be sure to visit the website p0.dev/IDAC. There'll be a bunch of information there you can kind of check out and learn more about what you guys are doing. So thank you again for being with us. For those listening, keep on liking, subscribing, sharing with friends, enemies. Doesn't matter. As long as they're listening, that's all that matters. So check us out on the web, idacpodcast.com. And with that, we'll leave it for this week. Thanks, everybody, for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.